Hello and welcome to SLP Full Disclosure. I am your host, Jennifer Martin, and joining me today is the one, the only, Jordyn Carroll. And we are going to talk about something that is always important. And when I was thinking about this topic, I was thinking, holy moly, I'm so glad things have changed so dramatically since I got out of grad school, which when I think about some of the things we were doing then, it just makes me bristle. Before I introduce our guest, I want to tell you all about our sponsor, AMN Passport app. And on this app, you can find, book, and manage all of your travel assignments. It's kind of your one-stop shopping. So learn more at amnpassport.com. Once again, that is amnpassport.com. So today we're going to talk about autism inclusion and acceptance. And before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about Jordyn because she has done a lot. So this is a small summary of some of it. So Jordyn Carroll MS CCC-SLP is a speech language pathologist and trailblazer within the field of speech pathology. She specializes in culturally responsive therapy, child language development, and advocacy. Jordyn's business services include therapy and assessment, speaking engagements, providing learning opportunities, consulting, product editing, creating diverse materials, and selling meaningful products and apparel. So welcome, Jordyn. I'm so happy that you're here today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here. Love this podcast.
Oh, that means a lot because so I was thinking about it. You were here, and if you have not listened to her first episode of it, went back and looked, it was November 2020. So
Wow.
only a couple things have changed since then, right?
Right, not much.
But a lot has changed for you because, I followed you before that, and now you're just on a different level. And I feel like people know about you and the content. You're one of my favorite people to follow. I love your Instagram and we'll talk about that and put all that in the notes. But yeah, you're just one of my favorites and you're so talented. You're really, really good at social media. So
Thank you.
one of of course, yeah. So I'm so honored to have you. And again, you are just one of the things that I love about you and your content is you're just so authentic and thoughtful about it. And I feel like when you say something or put something out there, it's really well thought out. You don't just say things. You don't just put things. It's like, so when you say something or do something, I pay attention. And I think a lot of people feel that way. So one of the things that you're very knowledgeable on is autism, inclusion, and acceptance. And like I mentioned, that's changed. Luckily,
Yeah,
I will tell you
thankfully.
stories that make you cringe. Yes. But before we get started with that, just can you give a little bit of a background about, what your professional journey was and what led you to really have this knowledge and desire to learn more about this field or this subject?
Absolutely. First of all, I really appreciate what you said about the authenticity of my social media because that means a lot to me. I tell people all the time, like, if I don't care about something, I don't post it. Like, anything I care about, I
Yeah.
make sure I'm like passionate about it. I don't post things just for fluff. I will go long periods of time without posting anything if there's nothing like on my heart to say. But if I have something to say, I make sure that it's said. So I appreciate the people that, like really value that and pay attention. My background with autism goes really far back, actually. My mom no longer is, was a special education teacher for 30 plus years. And I spent so many hours of my life in her classroom. And she just had an immense respect for the students, an immense love for the students. She didn't treat them any differently. Um, and I just feel like watching her and learning from her, I had that respect myself. I didn't see those students any differently. I always hung out with them out in recess and like things like that. So I think that's where it really started is like these people are my friends and I'm listening to them and I don't like the way that a lot of people treat them. And I felt that way since I was a child. And then I spent my whole life, like doing Special Olympics and just spending a lot of time with so many different types of people. So then going into the field and knowing, okay, this is a population that I already know about, am passionate about, want to help, and I want their voices to be heard. That's when I realized like just how important it was to me and where I wanted to go within my profession. So then working in the school systems, in DC, they have these classes called self-contained classes, where that's
Mhm.
where most of the autistic students were, especially if they just needed help with the academics, if they had learning disabilities as well. Like that's where a lot of them spent majority of their time. So that's where I spent majority of my time because I was a speech pathologist, and most of them had speech on their IEP. So from early intervention, a lot of them started at the schools at 2 years old, and then I worked all the way through high school. So for 3 or 4 years, I had that experience with those self-contained students. That was always the highlight of my day. That I had like such a great time in. I just spent so much time in those classrooms and got to see the development, especially when you talk about the students who were like 2, 3 years old and going from non-speaking or just not understanding how to communicate their needs to just watching them develop and grow and tell you the things they like and don't like and the things that they want to do and don't want to do. It just warmed my heart. It made me feel great. So then we see this shift in the profession and education where people are talking about being autistic and talking about what that experience is like and the services that they suffered from, which I don't use that word lightly,
Mhm.
but those services that they
Yeah.
suffered from growing up and how that has influenced who they are as adults today. And just like seeing people finally start to listen to them and pay attention to how we're treating them, and how we're quote unquote trying to fix them and how problematic that is. So I'm glad that we've seen this shift and we've seen people really begin to care about the way that we're treating autistic people and anybody in that community.
Yeah, that is so well said. And my mom is also a retired special education teacher, and and one of the things that you said is just such a good reminder. And I think about this often for myself that how we treat people, and regardless of the population, is taught. And so you had such a great example from your mom of saying, oh, they should be treated no differently than anybody else. And so I just think that's a good reminder that we need to remember that when we say things and do things, regardless of the group, the diagnosis, that, kids are watching us. And so we
Exactly.
want to make sure that we set that example as well. And yeah, it sounds like it was just like from the beginning, this was a match made. This was a population that you were kind of meant to work with. And so what is your work with the autistic community at this moment professionally?
Right. Well, another thing I want to say, going back to my mom before I forget, is that
Uh-huh.
along with the love and like the respect that she had for them and she didn't treat them any differently, that also meant that she had high expectations. Like she had high expectations for her students. And I think that goes a long way, regardless of the population. If
Yeah.
we expect something from the students, 9 times out of 10, they're going to want to meet those expectations. They want to do well. Like that's how kids are. So I think that's really important to remember, regardless of who you're working with. Now I work for a school full time virtually, so 100% virtual. I work with high schoolers. I would say about half of
Nice.
my, um, yeah, I would say about half of my caseload is autistic. We have a great time. I love working with them. A lot of times when you get to high school, we're doing a lot of like pragmatic things like social scenarios and
Hmm.
understanding how we are communicating so that we can get the message across that we need to, so we can receive the things that we need to. And that is a lot of what I do now. But when I came into this role, there was there were many goals and like things that students were working on things that students were working on that I didn't necessarily agree with, like the eye contact or like speaking about non-preferred topics, things like that that I don't believe are necessary or should be within our scope of practice. We don't need to do those things, or they're not important for communication. So in a lot of those instances, I would change the goal or just the target of what we would work on in session to, um, are you able to communicate your needs? Are you able to hold a conversation?
Yeah.
If this is a topic you don't want to talk about, tell me that. Tell me, I don't really want to talk about this. This isn't something that I enjoy discussing. Like things like that. Tell me how to get your message across in a way that is receivable. So that's what I do a lot now with the high schoolers. And then, of course, a lot of functional things. A lot of them are graduating soon or going to start jobs or going into um, a community college or four-year colleges. So we talk about, okay, what are some things that we'll need to work on here so that you're successful there. So that's where I am now with my full-time job. And then I also do some private clients on the side. I have some young, like 3 year olds who have not received a diagnosis yet. The parents are waiting on it. So a lot of times that is, a lot of parent counseling or what to expect. What are some things you can be doing at home? How can you support your child? So yeah, a lot of things like that. I do consulting where I discuss with groups of parents. I did a presentation with this group a couple times now called Autism in Color, where I talk to parents of students who are Black and Brown or other minorities, and we discuss how it may look different for them and how they can be an advocate once their child is in the school system, once they get their diagnosis, or if they have it already. So I try to stay in touch in different lanes.
Yeah, you're covering all the age groups. I bet you are so good with those high schoolers. I'm just thinking I would have loved to have had you as an educator in high school. But that is, I mean, you make such a good point that it's, and we'll dig into that, but it really is. And I, had those goals too. I remember thinking, we'll make eye contact. Whereas like when I think about forcing somebody to make eye contact with me speaking, because that was the goal, I cringe because
Mm-hmm.
it feels so inappropriate now. And, I'm just so glad that when you know better, you do better. I'm really glad there is, I know it's not, we have a long way to go still, but gosh, I'm glad that we've started to move in that direction some. And one of the things, so I wanted to get your thought and opinion on this. And so I've, read several articles and, when I got out of school, and even I feel like until just recently, and you will know better than this, but it was always, person first language. Like you would always say child with autism, student with autism, adult with autism. And now there's been this shift to identity first language. And I just love your opinion. What do you think about that? And how do you use the terms?
My great question, because people are definitely very confused about this. My
Hmm.
preference is identity first because that is what I've heard from the autistic community. So
Yeah.
listening to them, what they tell me, what they've told everybody, especially if you
Hmm.
follow like autistic people on social media, which is great, they'll tell me, like your identity, like my autism is a part of me. It's not something that is ever going to go away. Um, so I personally, like, I am autistic. I am an autistic individual. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's where what it comes down to is when we say person with autism or a person with disability, it makes it seem like we're afraid to say that they're autistic or that there's a negative connotation behind it when there's not. So I prefer the identity first because that's what I've been told. However, I know that there are still autistic people or people with autism that prefer the person first language. So I think when you come, like, my default is identity first, but I think when you come into contact with somebody specifically, you might want to ask, like, what do you prefer? How do you like to be referred to? So, and I think like that is the same. I think about my identity with my race. So people have a preference between being called like Black or African American. I know for a long time we've made a shift to Black because every Black person that you see is not a descendant of Africa. So it
Mhm.
just, the African American, or are not even
Yeah.
American. So
Yeah.
people,
They don't fall under either. So,
a
yeah.
lot of them don't fall under either of those
Yeah.
categories,
It's
right?
true. Yes.
So we've seen that same shift with race of I prefer to be called Black. I don't prefer to be called African American. But there are some
Hmm.
people who do, who still consider it to be politically correct to be referred to as African American. So another situation where you might default to one, but if you come into contact with
Hmm.
somebody, you might want to ask.
Yeah, I think that's just such a great reminder because, like you said, I've seen a huge shift where people who are autistic, they say, that's who I am. I'm not going to put that secondary. But then some of the things I was reading were parents that were saying, oh, it's still just, I'm trying to get used to the idea. And so it's, if it's a newer diagnosis or whatnot, it's when it's, autistic child, or they said, I prefer the child with autism. So I think your reminder is so valid. Ask.
Yeah,
If ask in a respectful way, what do you prefer? That is always better than making an assumption of what somebody prefers and then being incorrect. So yeah, I always
absolutely.
say whether, pronouns, race, diagnose, like just ask.
Just
And
ask.
and if you ask in a respectful way, people will usually have no problem answering and letting you
Exactly.
know. So,
And I will
and to be
say,
appreciative.
yes, they will definitely appreciate it. And I will say that
Yeah.
I have come into contact with a lot of parents and children who had different perspectives. So a parent might
Hmm.
feel one way about the term or about the diagnosis in general. That happens a lot. A parent
Hmm.
might feel one way about it, and the child will feel another way. And I think
Yeah.
that is something probably for a whole nother episode that should be discussed because that parent has a lot of influence on how the children see themselves. So if the parent is
Yeah.
like not accepting of the diagnosis or doesn't want to talk about the identity first or just like wants to shove it under the carpet, then that ends up being problematic for the child.
Hmm.
It makes them feel like they're like need to be fixed or they're not good enough. So that's definitely
Yeah.
a conversation to be had as well.
Yeah. That's where like a lot of shame can come from is, that's, yeah. So you're right. That is, we could have a whole.
Yeah.
So I want to ask, just because you have been so heavily involved in, sounds like most of your career with the autistic community, what are the biggest changes that you've seen, let's just say in the last 5 years when it comes to autism inclusion and acceptance, and let's say mainly in the public school systems? What have you seen?
I think that varies. I definitely think it varies. I've worked since graduating. I've worked in two locations in Washington, D.C. and in California. Those
Hmm.
two places are very different in the way that they treat their autistic students. So both both areas, both states have the like self-contained classrooms or have the classrooms that are mostly for the autistic students. I would say that in California, inclusion is more of a norm than in DC. In
Mm.
DC, most of those students stay in that classroom like the entire time.
Wow.
Yes. Most of the students are not like they might go out for recess with other classes. Sometimes they don't even do that in DC. So
Mm.
um, there really hasn't, and as far as inclusion in the public school system, there, at least in my experience, I haven't seen
Hmm.
as much as a change. There are like some teachers. I remember there's an amazing teacher. She was a pre-K self-contained class. She was a teacher there, and she did such a good job of making sure that her students were involved everywhere in everything. But that was just her. Like she put in all the work to make
Hmm.
that happen, which is part of why she was such an amazing teacher. But it's not the norm throughout the schools. In California, I would say they do a better job of like letting the students go into like the general education population much more often. The gen ed students are more aware of who these students are. The gen ed students include them more so than I've
Mm.
seen in DC. So I think it varies. It might even vary by district, not even necessarily by state. But I have seen changes in discussions about it, but I think a lot of places are still waiting to figure out how to implement those things. And I will also say that I don't know a school right now that is not understaffed. And so I think that might
Yeah.
have something to do with it as well.
Well, and if we think about kind of the long-term outcomes and, of not having more of that inclusion, it's like, well, what is like, in what way does that benefit the autistic students?
Not at all. And it doesn't benefit the general education students either, because why
No,
would
it
you not? It
doesn't.
does, it just, yeah, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting you say this because I'm thinking my son who's in high school and I'm in Colorado and there is a lot of inclusion. And so it's interesting because he and I will be having discussions and he'll say, "Oh yeah, that's so and so. Yeah, he's autistic. He's
Hmm.
awesome." We all, it's just like it's and that you're exactly right. So you're also teaching them because this is taught. How we perceive and how if they see that, oh well, that was those kids were just in the classroom all day. We
Yep.
never saw them.
They
They didn't
just stay
like.
over there.
What are you communicating to the general education students? Like then when they go out into society, what do we expect? How do we expect them to interact? But it just it feels very archaic in some
It
ways.
does. And it's unfortunate, which is why I really appreciate those individuals that make it happen, that make sure that they're
Hmm.
included, or, just bring all of the population together. I think it's so important, like we said, for everybody
Hmm.
involved. So hopefully we are going to see more of that transition happening. But I really think it has a lot to do with the staffing of schools, because it just makes everything so much more difficult
Yeah.
to handle. So I'm hoping that is
Yeah.
possible soon.
Yeah. And if we think about it too, it's like when they do leave school, they don't live in inclusion.
Not at all.
They live in society. So,
Not at all.
like, what?
Exactly.
So, not only are you not doing them any favors in school or the general education population, but it's like, what do you expect is going to happen when they're done with school? And you've
Exactly.
not allowed them these opportunities to have these interactions. It's,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's really
It's,
unfortunate. And this is, I know we're talking about autism, but they do the same thing with students that have like behavior concerns, or
oh,
um
yeah.
yeah, like everybody just stays so separate. Everybody just has their own little
Yeah.
spaces, and I don't think it's
Hmm.
beneficial. So if you
No.
like, if anybody here, if you're listening and you are an individual that can make a difference and can say like, hey, I'm going to bring
Hmm.
my class into this class or into this program, or we're going to focus on this with the general ed students today, I think it'll be very important. Or even starting a program so
Yeah.
that general ed students can go into self-contained classrooms, things like that, where we could just have more of a mix, have more inclusion.
Yeah. Can they join the other groups for specials? Can they, and you're exactly right, because I'm thinking there probably was a time when California didn't do what they did. That change had to be made because there was a time when all of those groups were segregated.
Yep.
And so some buddies, that change had to be made. So it doesn't mean that, oh, this is the way we've always done it. Well, doesn't mean you have to keep doing it that way.
Not at all.
So it doesn't have to keep happening that way. It doesn't, and it shouldn't. So,
Right.
um, and so what are some steps? So if we're thinking through, if I'm an SLP in a school and my school doesn't have a lot of inclusion opportunities for neurodiverse students, what are some suggestions of ways that I can make changes in that area of what I can control?
I would say start, I was going to say from the bottom up, but you can start everywhere. But for the bottom
Mm-hmm.
up for me would be to go into like general ed teachers' classrooms and ask like, hey, can we do X, Y, and Z with these students? Or can I bring my students in the next time you're having a
Mm-hmm.
game day or you're having a movie day or anything like that? Can
Yeah.
I bring my students in, or can these students join? I know these students would love this. I think that's a great place to start. Or the other way
Mm-hmm.
around, like, hey, do you have a few students you want to send over to the self-contained class, because we're doing this project and it would be great to include them all together. So just small
Yeah.
situations like that. And a lot of teachers like that kind of relief. A lot of teachers
Mm-hmm.
really would not mind. Or you can even say like, hey, can I come into the classroom for 30 minutes bring these students and just do like a whole group activity. Teachers would love
Yeah.
that break. There's no, like, I can't think of a reason they would say no to that. So that's one way to do
Yes.
it. And then I'm thinking from the top down would be like going to like a principal
Hmm.
or even going to the school district and saying like, hey, I think there needs to be more inclusion and we love evidence. So
Hmm.
bring your evidence and say like, this is why
Yeah.
it's beneficial. These are some ideas I have of how we can include students, or make sure that maybe like lunches all together for these classes, or
Hmm.
maybe we do like whole school activities so that my students can join as well. And just really having that information to give to them and present it to them. And a lot of times going from the top down, it's not an
Yeah.
immediate change, but you really just want to make sure that like you are giving them this information. They can't say they didn't know. They can't say like, I
Yeah.
didn't know this was going to be helpful or beneficial or it was necessary. So I would say like do both. Go to the top and give them that information, share your ideas. Don't be afraid to do it, even if it's just like in a paper,
Hmm.
like, hey, I created this information for you about why inclusion is important. And I even have some ideas of what we can do. If you could just look over it, and my email's there if you want to talk about it later on. Like, it doesn't have to be like setting up a whole meeting. And
Hmm.
then doing the same thing with the teachers and just starting from the bottom there. So I think there's several things that we can do, and like just those little
Yeah.
things that you can do like, in your location to make a change.
Yeah. And you're right. It doesn't have to be these giant, it's small steps that
Mm-hmm.
create big change. And I think you're exactly right. What can you do to, even within your caseload, you have control over that. So I love that idea of you saying, hey, I'm going to bring them into here. Or even could you pull a small group where you have some students that are from the general education population with some of your students in your more your autistic students, and bring them together in small groups. I love that, just
Mm-hmm.
to have that interaction. But you're exactly right. It starts with, we can make these changes, and it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be, I'm coming in, we're going to do this. It's like you said, come in, say, hey, this is something that's, I think is really important. This is why it's important. This is how we can start implementing it in small ways. And then what happens is when people see that that's successful, and then the school next door might start doing, the SLP is going to get wind that you've done that, and they're going to, and that's how we see, I'm not trying to view things with rose-colored glasses, but be realistic. But really, that's when people see that things are doable and have great benefit, they're gonna. It's hard for them not to do the same.
It is. And word of mouth is a
So,
very powerful thing. So just like you're
oh
saying,
yes,
if we are doing it at this school and all the
hmm,
like the parents learn about it and they're like, oh, this is such an awesome
yes,
program. And the parents, they talk everywhere. The parents are going to tell everybody. They're going to go to their different schools and say, hey, why are we doing this at
yeah,
our school? Like, those things happen all the time. It just takes one thing to start that.
absolutely. And it's, yeah, don't feel, it's one of those where don't wait for somebody else to do it.
Exactly.
It's maybe you need to do it. And I love how you bring up the parent piece, because I'm thinking too, there's so many times where I feel like it's changing a little bit, but parents oftentimes were saying, this is what's going to happen, this house. And they say, okay. But I think even having more parent involvement, like, would you like to see them have more? These are the benefits, because that has a lot of influence as well.
It really does. Especially like I know a lot of schools in like really affluent areas where the parents'
Mm-hmm.
word means a lot. So if you are able to like get the parents on your side and like they're able
Yeah.
to fight for you in that same way, that's going to
Mm-hmm.
go a long way as well.
Yeah. Because I mean, these, like when they leave school, we think out of sight, out of mind. They're a child forever.
Yep,
And they want to see, they're no different than any other parent. We all want to see our kids be successful and have a good life. And so it's that can contribute to that greatly. So yeah, getting parents, and again, it doesn't have to be in a, I feel like sometimes we've become so, oh yeah, we're going to go in there, but and sometimes we have to because people aren't listening. But I think it can also be, like you said, it can be a really an informative conversation, because sometimes people just don't know what they don't know. If you help them
exactly.
understand, then they may look at it differently. So,
Yeah.
um, And what would you say, you know, it's been, I mean, I just feel like I could talk to you all day, but so yeah, we know it's like just even talking to you for this short period of time, it's like, seeing why it's so important. We're given ideas of like, what are small steps you can take, and, what are the outcomes that are going to be really beneficial for everybody that come from that. What resources, if somebody is saying, listening and thinking, oh, yes, yes, like what have you done to really arm yourself with this information and education?
I think for myself, a lot of it is my past experience, but what has really made the biggest difference for me is social media because I am able to
Mm-hmm.
listen to so many different autistic individuals about their experience, about what they went
Mm-hmm.
through in school, about things that they wish could change but haven't changed. Um, I can't think of like specific names because I don't want to give you the wrong name, but I can't think of like specific names off the top of my head,
Yeah.
but I will make sure to send them to you so you can put them in like the show notes.
Okay.
Some of my
Yes.
favorite people that I follow, and I follow so many. Like I follow this girl. She's in high school, and her mom runs her account, and
Mm-hmm.
she just started her first job. She's just great.
Oh,
She's a wonderful. I love watching her.
yeah.
And then I follow another one who the mom is autistic. She has three autistic boys, and
Oh,
they're a black family. And she talks about because there's been a lot of back and forth about ABA, which I personally
yeah.
can't say I'm a fan of, but she specifically changed my
Mm-hmm.
thought process about it because
Hmm.
she's her her perspective is I am a black mom of three black boys that like have to learn how to behave in a way that's acceptable for them to
Mm-hmm.
survive in this world. So she is,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say she's pro ABA, but she understands the need for her sons and still wants it to change. So like her
Yeah.
perspective, I want to say her Instagram is Nigh Functioning Autism, NIGH Functioning Autism. But again, I'll put it
Okay.
in the show notes to send.
Okay.
But I have like so many people that I've just learned so much from because it's their lived experience. So that's my
Yeah.
resource. Like the people are my resource. I like to learn exact like from the people who have experienced it the most. So that's what I would say. And then as far as like books and things like that, I haven't really
Mm-hmm.
come across any because I think that we're still like on this revolution. I think that we're still
Mm-hmm.
in the process of like this change. So I'm hoping that soon there will be like, oh, this is a go-to book for the
Yeah.
autistic experience, and you'll learn so much about it. And I don't have that yet, but I think that it will be happening soon. Another one I just thought of is I think her name is Carrie Ebert. Again, I'll add it
Mm-hmm.
into the notes, but her son is
Yeah.
autistic, and she does an amazing job of just explaining what his life is like and who he is as a person,
Wow.
and just learning from these individuals and learning how they're all different. I think that's another issue that we
Yeah.
run into a lot with autism is just like lumping them into, oh, you're autistic, so this is what you're like. And I think being able to see all these different individuals, like it just confirmed like what I knew. Like they're so different, and I think everybody needs to see that.
This is why, again, you're so good because you're exactly right. I'm thinking, oh, well, what resources, like what professor wrote this article, what book? But you are 100% right. Go to the
Mm-hmm.
source. Like you're not going to learn, what to do any better than talking to people that have lived it. And so what
Exactly.
a great reminder. You don't need to go out and, I mean, yes, there's validity also in taking a 2-day course or reading a book, but you're right. You're going to learn so much from talking to people that have said, oh no, I've been on the other side of this for years. I can tell you exactly what would have changed this experience or helped me. And what a, again, you're just, yeah, this is why you're so well loved
Thank
because
you. And I think that's the biggest
you've
shift.
got, yeah, yeah. And your Instagram too. I mean, you put some great information as well. So do not sell yourself short. You have
Yes.
a lot
Follow
of
me too.
yes, follow. Well, Jordyn, God, I could seriously talk to you all day, but I know that that you have other things to do. But Thank you so much. I am just sitting here thinking how grateful I am that you chose this field, that you do the work that you do. You are a change maker in so many ways. And I think just such an inspiration that we all have it in us. We can do this work, and when we know better, we do better. Just because it's been that way doesn't mean it has to stay that way. So just remember that, and small steps. It doesn't have to be small steps. Like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. It's like just small steps. So
Exactly.
and we'll put all of your information in our show notes. If you are not following Jordyn, I am telling you, JRC, the SLP, so well done. You could, I don't know if you do all of your own social media, but you are so good at it,
Thank
so
you.
talented, such great information. And again, that will link you to all of your other sources, because you do a lot, and just involved with a lot of different areas. So thank you for your time, and just for being you,
Of
and for being
course.
part of this field.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Two quotes I want to leave you with, the two quotes that I live by. The first one, be the person you needed when you were younger, because you know
Oh,
what you needed. I feel like that inspires everything that I do. And then the second,
mm-hmm.
do what you can where you are with what you have. And that is especially important for what we've talked about in this episode. Do what you can where you are
Yeah.
with what you have. You are able to make a change. Like, don't sell yourself short. You can make a difference. I promise you, you can, and you will, as soon as you do what you can. So those are my two favorite quotes. I hope you can take something from this episode, and thank you so much for having me. This is great conversation.
And that wraps up this episode. Thank you for tuning into SLP Full Disclosure. For more information about this episode, check out the show notes on our website at medtravelers.com/SLP Full Disclosure. And don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe so you never miss a guest. Are you interested in becoming a travel SLP? Visit medtravelers.com to learn more and explore the exciting opportunities we offer at top-level facilities across the country. Also, a special thanks to Jonathan Carey for producing this episode, and Aiden Dykes for the music and editing. And as always, this episode was powered by Med Travelers. See you next time.